I came from the customer experience world before I, moved to product and
Right.
SEO. And one of the things I noticed in that world was your most passionate, eventually, your most passionate fan or customer is usually initially one of your most vocal critics.
Interesting.
And if you can convert those people, they scream your name at the top of their lungs. And those are, even though you would not think those should be your influencers, but those can be really good influencers because one, they help you build better product and they will speak about you. If you're paying someone who has no passion for your product, people can smell it, people
Yeah.
can, even if it does work, it's it does. I mean, it's not always every time it backfires, but I can almost count like 9 out of 10 times it backfires in ways where they will speak about your product in ways that are not true. And then you end up getting influence or influx of the wrong customers. And then they come in, the expectations are wrong. And then your customer support team have a nightmare. You have churn issues. Like, yeah, you might initially get the revenue boost, but then you get a churn, which I don't know at the end of the quarter, whoever is responsible for what metrics, someone has to pay for it.
You are listening to Power Marketing with Kevin Lee. Kevin and his agency Did It have helped thousands of businesses win through superior marketing, as have his books, articles, speaking engagements, and the E-Marketing Association Power Marketing podcasts. Here's Kevin.
Super excited to have Ola King with me as a guest on the podcast because he's at Moz, active within MozCon, and he'll also be speaking at the Brighton SEO Conference, which is coming up in San Diego shortly. So we'll start, Ola, with what your topic is and what you'll be doing at the Brighton SEO Conference.
Okay. Thanks for the introduction, Kevin. First, to correct, I'm actually no longer at Moz. I
Okay.
left a few months ago, but prior to that, I was a user researcher and an SEO nerd and host of the MozCon, I think a couple of them. These days, I consult for SEO, and just like you, I'm my own crazy client for a bunch of projects that I'm working on, so that I can test my SEO theories on those projects. My topic for Brighton SEO is why SEO is a UX discipline. And the whole concept is pretty much to help people future-proof their SEO approach as things are changing, and to see that it's actually not entirely a new world. It's just embracing a world that already exists.
Absolutely. Yeah. I get a lot of questions these days from both clients and prospects about future-proofing SEO. And one of the areas that they're interested in future-proofing against is when some queries end up getting replaced where it's no longer a SERP, it's just an AI giving you the answer to the question that you asked. The top 10 pizzerias, or the best way to glue wood to ceramic, or whatever it is. You may end up skipping a SERP and just end up with a ChatGPT or Bard or one of the other LLMs providing an answer. So that's the area that I certainly get the most questions of. But UX is typically not thought of in that way, although you could say that an audible answer or a written answer coming out of an AI is, in fact, to some extent, a UX. So I'd love to hear what your thoughts are on some of the queries moving into LLMs, as well as what other forms of future proofing you'll be covering.
Yeah. So I think ultimately, I don't even think the search engines know how they want to build this quite yet. So it's hard to optimize for something that is a moving target right now. But in a situation where, where things are uncertain, it's always good to go back to the truths, the first principles. So ultimately, people would always look for information. Well, people would always search. That's number one. And number two, when they're searching, they would always want information that is more accurate, faster, better, more comprehensive. And so the search engines will keep optimizing for those types of things. And that's what we're seeing with the ChatGPT and generative AI. And Google, they're in a tricky situation where they have to build the best experience for the searchers, but they also know that they have this thriving community or ecosystem with SEOs that they don't really want to piss off too much. So they are trying to, help those people as well. They also have the advertising business. So it's very tricky, but ultimately they will keep doing things that are better for the searchers. And that said, the experience for the searchers with the generative AI it's almost surface level. It gives the most information given the query or the conversation because it's back and forth, but it wouldn't go as in depth. I see them as like a very smart friend that isn't an expert on anything. He's like, I know this information, but I know a guy that knows more. So a guy would be the websites, and that's where now, so we've covered the user experience from the generative AI and the searcher. Now that's where it goes to then the website. When people land on your website, you then want the experience to just be seamless, like what they just came from. And I think that's what Google is trying to do with the HCU, like Alpha Content Update, to make sure the websites are also, optimizing, thinking about the users in terms of this. It depends on different industries. There's no one size fits all. What would work for, out content is not the same that would work in an industry where, Gen Z is looking for the best headphones. It has to be completely different. So that's where the UX comes into place, understanding who it's for, what it's for, and the context. Is this a search that would typically be made on mobile or a search that will be made on desktop or even a voice search? And yeah.
Right. Those are really valid points. One way I've tried to explain it to clients when they're sort of looking for guidance is I say, if you are lucky enough to rank, or in the case of paid search where you're paying for the privilege of ranking, at the time that person skims the links or in the listings, you're making a promise and you have to fulfill that promise on the landing page. So when there's a disconnect between what the person expects to get based on the title that they're seeing and perhaps a snippet as well, or even a visual element, or in the case of a YouTube search, actually a thumbnail, right? You have to fulfill that promise, right? And it's when that disconnect occurs, that's a bad user experience. And Google will ding that either with a bad quality score in the case of paid search or a bad organic, experience from the organic ranking perspective. So do you find that's one way that is useful to explain it to your clients as well?
Yeah, branding becomes super important right now. I watched a video by Seth Godin a while back where he was like, imagine, Nike creating a car. What would it look like? You've never seen a car of a Nike, but you have a sense of what it would be like based on their brand promise and how they've kept it over the years. And that's the way it should be when someone sees your brand name. They should know the type of content that they will see. Apple, for example, you see their content, you're not expecting to see crazy animations or some, it's going to be straight to the point, brief, minimalist, and for the most part. Content from HubSpot will be completely different. They will be way more in depth and typically more researched. So things like that. The brand you have to put more thought on the brand, and each of your content has to be a representation of the brand.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. There sort of needs to be a congruency between the brand and the content type, which brings an inherent potential conflict, because right now, for example, a lot of marketing folks outside of the search community are saying, well, storytelling is back. We need to do storytelling. We want to tell stories and weave the brand into stories. But storytelling is sort of the opposite structure of journalistic writing. Journalistic writing is an inverted pyramid style where the headline is, Butler kills billionaire. And then it proceeds to tell you, that he was found lying dead, right? Whereas a story starts with, 280 pages of content at the end. the butler kills the billionaire, right? So it's a very different form of storytelling when you do it journalistically versus when you do it as a murder mystery or some other thing where the punchline goes to the end, right? But in storytelling, it's actually very difficult for a search engine or an LLM to sort of figure it out, because the meat of the story is like hidden in the middle, right? As opposed to inverted pyramid style, which puts the meat right up front. Any thoughts as to how one can reconcile, for all those folks who are super excited about having influencers tell stories and telling stories themselves and creating branded content on sites that tell stories, search engines are going to have a heck of a time understanding what the story is about.
Yeah, that's a great point, and that's something I've been thinking about as I've been building my deck for this conference. Storytelling has been something that I've been obsessed with in the past little while, and like studying movies, director styles, and Google, they've been mentioning lately about the importance of perspective. I think they actually had a product announced not too long ago, or a plan to feature more perspectives. So perspectives, stories are narratives and then perspectives. I think we have to redefine, back to what I said earlier on about going back to the basics, define what story is. When you mentioned the story, you mentioned story structure, but that doesn't necessarily mean that's what a story always is. Ultimately, a story is just a narrative. So it doesn't have to be inverted or chronological, or a story can be a story. Some movies starts with the action right at the first scene.
Yeah, sure.
Or then they would say like someone died, and then they use the rest of the movie to say how the person died.
Right.
And
sure.
that's like inverted.
Yeah.
And so you can still do that. Like my presentation, back to what I said about presentation, like I'm trying to have storytelling elements in that. Like it's going to be 3 acts, and then there'll be a hero's journey to it. But anyone that sees the presentation might not see that. But the whole point is to put people in a world instead of just throwing out data. I want people to feel like the hero, to go through something. And you can do that with content, meet people where they are, don't start with, let's say, a recipe site. Don't start talking about your grandmother and all those things. Give people what they came there for, but then wrap it in a way that they will remember. So they might not remember that that you use 2 cups of rice, for example, but they might remember the time that you used the wrong amount of rice, and then you ended up having a watery rice. And now they know it sticks in their mind that they have to use 2 cups of rice for a cup of water, for example. It's just how you package things. It's how you wrap it up. The story should be the wrap, not the end goal.
Absolutely. So not everybody is lucky enough to have an exciting business category or an exciting product or an exciting service. So I think some of those folks struggle with content creation and in making that content interesting. And so, when you're an accountant, or when you make a particular piece of equipment that measures the thickness of paper in a paper mill, like how do you recommend these folks come up with content ideas so that they can continue to, be on their journey of content creating and keep things fresh and meet the needs of the folks who are trying to learn about those products or learn about those services? Maybe it's longer tail, maybe it's not longer tail, but it seems like there's sort of B2B writer's block, right? That happens after a certain point. Less so if you're in an exciting category. I mean, if you're in the movie making business, I've got fresh stuff all the time. But if you're in a less exciting category, I think sometimes folks end up with this sort of content block. We won't even call it writer's block, because they may be doing videos, they may be doing infographics, etc.
Yeah, everything is story, and life. What we call life is made up of, everything is made up of story. I say story is the glue of humanity. What we are on right now, this video, you could break it down into the components and it sounds very nerdy, like, oh, it's a screen, it's over the internet, over protocols and whatnot. But then someone decides to call it Zoom, and then we all have an image of what Zoom is because they've told the story of what it is. And I think it goes back to the user experience. Every business should think of who they're serving and what would get the person engaged to their business. A bank should not necessarily be talking about the transactions and types of accounts. They should be thinking about what keeps their customer up at night. What happens when they miss a payment? That becomes a story. There's a hero's journey there, as opposed to just, everything can be interesting. And I would hope the business owners, and if they can't, they should hire people who are excited to tell the stories of their brand, or at least tell your customers' stories.
Right, right. What about repurposing of content to make it more snackable? And that could be written content, it could be video content, audio content, etc. Sort of, with some portion of the audience which is a little bit ADD, either naturally or just as a result of how busy they are. What are some guidelines with regards to taking something that was, crafted and worked very hard on and has a hero's journey in it? And then, well, how do you repackage it as snackable content? Because sometimes the hero's journey can't be re-edited effectively, right, into a snackable piece.
Yeah, that's a great question. Ultimately, I like the hero's journey. It's usually, some people use the eight-step structure. Some people use the 3 steps. You can have that with almost anything. Like you look at TikTok, you look at Twitter. I don't even do it consciously, but when I write, I tend to follow that. Like, I was trying to do this, then this happened, then this happened. And you can do that with everything as well. Like, are you suffering from writer's block? Well, there's this solution that does this and then does this. It's hard to give a blanket advice without, having an example of what you can work with. But ultimately, I think people should stop trying to just write or game search engines. I think people should just assume that they are trying to explain something to a real person. Mm-hmm. And you'll find that naturally the story will come out when you're telling a real person. So the way I write anything now, it's like I'm having a conversation with someone and I start anticipating the questions the person would ask, like, oh, that doesn't make sense. Yeah, you're right. Then I would fix it. And by the end of it, it reads like a conversation. It's like a story.
Right, right. Excellent point. Something that's done more often in traditional marketing and probably may or may not have a place in sort of SEO is the idea of looking at a particular audience of your product, the folks who typically like to buy the product, and sort of creating or being involved in content, potentially creating content that appeals to those individuals, but is not about the product. I mean, you certainly see it from the perspective of advertising placements all the time. I mean, who advertises on golf tournaments, right? I mean, expensive cars, BMW, Mercedes, Porsche, right? Is the golf tournament about those things? No, obviously not. It's just that somebody decided that in the Venn diagram, when you sort of take the buyers of these things, they overlap a lot, right? And so they're associating the brand to content that isn't about the brand, but is about something entirely different, but appeals to that buyer. So do you see interesting ways that might be used in SEO with sort of a brand as a publisher or brand as a content creator, where they're really sort of thinking outside the confines of their own product or service?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, HubSpot is a brand that did that for the longest time, where they just create contents to help small businesses. And after time, they never mentioned HubSpot.
Right.
And Intercom is another brand that does a good job at that as well. They have blogs where they would never mention Intercom. It's about making not your product, but your audience, your customer, the superhero. They are not superhero, they are the hero. And then the hero would have superhero. So you mentioned the golf as an example. The golf professionals, those are the superheroes that are in the world of the audience. And when you see your superhero wearing a Rolex, you automatically want a Rolex, even though you know logically that that's not what makes them good. But right. You're like, oh, if they're using it, maybe there must be something. I would get a little bit of the magic on myself as well. And not necessarily for you to be a golfer, but just overall you want to get the same feeling. And I think brands or publishers can do that by having people that are performing well in their industry and have them just write helpful content, or create, not even just write, because now you can do videos and whatnot. Create helpful content for your audience that they will associate your brand to becoming better. And if they associate your brand to becoming better, whenever they want a product in your category, you will be the first thing that comes to mind.
Right, right. Well, that bridges perfectly into a question that just popped into my head, which is about influencers, right? And of course, everyone thinks that if I'm mentioning influencers, I'm talking about the Kardashians of the world. But I'm really just talking about folks that are experts or well-known in a particular category and have the subject matter expertise to speak to something. And again, maybe the content is directly on point to the product or service that's being sold, or maybe it just resonates with that audience. And so, when one's going to engage with sort of third-party content creators who aren't just pure writers or pure video creators, but also bring their own audience along with it, right? Do you feel like that should sort of be digital PR, where they didn't get paid and it was just sort of a quid pro quo of, hey, let's collab on these things? Or, should the American Express come out?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the reach and the pool of the influencer. Like for Notion, the brand or the product, I'm an ambassador, and they don't pay me for that. And I don't explicitly create content that much for Notion, but it's part of my lifestyle. So even when I'm like talking about SEO, or I'm showing a screenshot of what I'm doing, you'll see Notion somewhere in the background. And, I do benefit from that relationship in other ways through partnerships and whatnot, but they don't directly pay me. However, I know that they do have payment structures for, if you have like a big YouTube account and you have millions of views, then, you can discuss payments. They do have affiliate links. So there are different ways. I think you just have to look at, the value distribution. Is the value I'm giving the person, are they capturing a fair amount of value back as well?
Right, right. One of when fingers are pointed at influencer relationships that have gone wrong, usually it's sort of the lack of authenticity. So clearly, when you're a brand ambassador, as you are for Notion, you did that just because you already were passionate about it, right? As opposed to them reaching out to you. One of the things that I've found really interesting is identifying for our clients influencers that are already buying their product, right? Who are sort of already converted to the brand, and having conversations with those as opposed to taking somebody with, what looks like a good following and then trying to convince them to like the brand, right? Where it's much more likely to come off inauthentic. You have any thoughts on sort of best practices there?
Yeah, I totally agree. I came from the customer experience world before I, moved to product and SEO. Right. And one of the things I noticed in that world was your most passionate fan or customer is usually initially one of your most vocal critics.
Interesting.
And if you can convert those people, they scream your name at the top of their lungs. And those are, even though you would not think those should be your influencers, but those can be really good influencers, because one, they help you build better product and they will speak about you. If you're paying someone who has no passion for your product, people can smell it, people can, even if it does work, it does. I mean, it's not always every time it backfires, but I can almost count like 9 out of 10 times it backfires in ways where they will speak about your product in ways that are not true. And then you end up getting influence or influx of the wrong customers. And then they come in, the expectations are wrong. And then your customer support team have a nightmare. You have churn issues. Like, yeah, you might initially get the revenue boost, but then you get a churn, which I don't know, at the end of the quarter, whoever is responsible for what metrics, someone has to pay for it.
Right, right. Yeah, it actually leads me to another thought, which is that, in the end, the strongest marketing touch point is the product or service actually good, right? Because
Yeah, exactly.
no amount of paid advertising will convert a bad product or service into a success. And similarly, when you have a bad product or service, you have reputation management issues in SEO, which are particularly challenging. We know whether it's ratings in rating related sites, Google ratings or Yelp ratings, et cetera. Those proliferate. And I think marketers sometimes forget that they should, go a few cubicles down and make sure that product is good or service is good, because it'll make their job a lot easier if they can actually fulfill on the brand promise.
Yeah, exactly. And what you said about the brand promise is the key part. You could have a really great product, but if the promise you're making to your audience or customers is not accurate, then a bad product is a bad product based on that perception. So I always say, like, marketing, sales, and product, they need to be in alignment. Make sure you're building the thing that you're advertising and then you're selling.
Right. So let's assume that there's a brand who, has fixed themselves, right? But they have obviously a lot of, momentum and legacy content out there that perhaps doesn't always speak particularly highly of them. But, they've had their turnaround, new management, et cetera. And so they have this reputation management issue. Do you treat sort of a reputation management SEO strategy differently than you would where there is no reputation management issue?
Great question. Differently for sure, because you have to address the elephant in the room for that reason. But everything else will be status quo. It's like, you deal with the truth. You don't try to insult the intelligence of your industry or your customers. You address what they know. If the reputation is that your product is toxic, you should create content addressing why our products have the reputation that they're toxic. Then you can spend the rest of the content to then explain why it's not. Some people might still not believe, but at least they now trust you a little bit with that one content, and then the next content, a little bit more trust. Toby Lutke, Shopify CEO, says this thing about trust battery. That's one of the things that they use when they hire people at Shopify. And I use that also with my own life now. And also I look at what I do in that way. Like, every little thing you do adds or removes from that trust battery. And just be honest.
Right, right. Well, that's great advice, I guess, that bridges over from marketing to personal. Right?
Yeah.
And
people buy the product, so everything is personal.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, just philosophically, right? It's something that can work at the corporate or brand level, but it also makes sense for building one's personal brand, right? In the end, we're building often a personal brand alongside a corporate brand, and so it's good advice overall. When one has a highly visual product or service, do you feel like video SEO is ratcheted up from the perspective of, okay, we have to take advantage of the fact that YouTube's the second largest search engine in the world, and think much more about video content as a result of that?
Yeah, for sure. That's the bulk of my talk at Brighton SEO. It's the UX, whatever the users want. Don't think of Google. Don't think of ChatGPT. Don't think of anything. Just think of the user, their context. What do they want? And then that's when you can then optimize for the right channels. So, do they want videos for your type of products or content? Okay, cool. Then you create videos. Then you start thinking of for what platforms, and then start thinking of how to optimize that. Is it TikTok? Is it YouTube? Yes. Start with the end goal, which is to please your audience.
Great. So what has you excited about the next year? Is there anything in particular that's super exciting for you?
Everything. I'm someone who likes to learn a lot. And there was once upon a time I was in a world where things were more steady and it wasn't, you know, the world was more catered to specialists, which was not great for someone like me, I like to specialize, but I guess my biggest strength is being able to connect the dots in multiple fields. And I think the world is more catered to that now. Things are moving very fast, and it requires a lot of interdisciplinary thinking. And so everything is exciting, from AI to SEO to no code tools, because now, people can spin up their own projects quickly, hook up to an API, and who knows what people can create now. Everything is exciting to me now.
Yeah. Final question is really, when the internet, I'm old enough to remember when the internet was new, because I started in digital marketing before Google was founded. There was a lot of talk in the press about how the internet was the great equalizer, right? That it didn't matter whether you were Procter and Gamble or some small guy in their garage. But of course, as the internet has gone through its various evolutions, from the perspective of search ranking, from the perspective of many other elements, there sort of became a widening gulf, right? That it was certainly a lot harder for a brand new virgin domain to rank than it was for IBM. As a matter of fact, you'd have situations where an SEO professional would be asked by their client, like, why do they rank? I see a whole bunch of mistakes that they're making, right? And that they rank despite that. So do you feel like that there's potentially a re-democratization of the internet, and that startups can still go in and, by doing the right things and by continuing to really meet the needs of their customers, they can sort of catch up with some antiquated dinosaur that just happens to be in the same category?
UX I know you said internet is the great equalizer. I think UX is the great equalizer. That's how smaller upstarts can beat the giants, because, the person that has the most direct connection to the customers usually wins. And the advantage as a smaller person or team have is they can execute right away. You don't need to, go through bureaucracy and meetings and approvals. You can just do stuff. And if it works, it could work really well for you immediately. And before the bigger companies catch up, you've moved on to something else again.
Great. Well, that's excellent advice. And I look forward to keeping in touch as we both travel the newer versions of the internet, or Web 3.0 or AI powered internet. Thanks so much for joining me.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Kevin. This was fun.
Kevin Lee's Power Marketing is available on all your favorite podcast networks. Kevin loves helping businesses excel at marketing. Having marketing challenges? Just like Santa in The Miracle on 34th Street, if Kevin can't help you, he'll know someone who can. Find him on LinkedIn, subscribe, or follow.